here comes an absolutely egregious story about how closely tied the New York City Police Department is with the top Wall Street firms. In fact, they use taxpayer money to help Wall Street firms basically put together a private-public security team that monitors all of Lower Manhattan and most of Midtown Manhattan with cameras that are partly purchased at the taxpayers' expense and partly purchased by those big banks. This is an absolutely outrageous story. Apparently $150 million of taxpayer money has gone to equip a government facility in Lower Manhattan where Wall Street firms are basically spying on law-abiding citizens. The NYPD Chief Commissioner Raymond Kelly apparently promised Edward Frost, who is a Goldman Sachs executive vice president, that the NYPD is, quote, committed to the development and implementation of a comprehensive security plan for Lower Manhattan. One component of the plan will be a centralized coordination center that will provide space for full-time, on-site representation from Goldman Sachs and other stakeholders. So they're saying, yes, we will spend public money, as well as some of your money, to set up this spying operation, and we will allow you to partly run it. In fact, 2/3 of the people running this spying operation are private security officials from the largest financial institutions in New York. Now, they justify it by saying, oh, well, look, Goldman Sachs, in their infinite mercy, decided to have offices down near Wall Street. Gee, I wonder why they decided to do that. By the way, that deal included $1.65 billion in Liberty bonds, up to $160 million in sales tax abatements for construction materials and tenant furnishings, and a seat at the NYPD's coordination center. So they said, we will set up this coordination center where we get to spy on the citizens, and you will have a seat at that table. It's called, by the way, the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, and that coordination center is called the Lower Manhattan Security Coordination Center. There are 2,000 private spy cameras owned by the Wall Street firms, together with approximately 1,000 more owned by the NYPD, and they relay live video feeds of people in the streets in Lower Manhattan, also in Central Manhattan as well. There are 700 cameras that scour Midtown as well, and some great reporting on this from Truth Out, Pam Martin's reporting. Well, how about those Wall Street firms that are part of this project? Well, they must be good law-abiding citizens, right? If they get this great privilege of spying on the rest of us. Well, the Wall Street firms involved right now are under at least 51 federal and state corruption probes for mortgage securitization, fraud, and other matters. 51 federal and state corruption probes. And as I told you, 2/3 of the personnel are operated by non-NYPD people, including Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Federal Reserve, and New York Stock Exchange employees. And the New York City taxpayers are paying for it, but also, don't worry, all of us. The United States taxpayers, through the Federal Department of Homeland Security, has also contributed to this coordination center. So we thought it was bad when they were doing warrantless surveillance of United States citizens without probable cause, without getting warrants, etc. Now, look, these are public streets, but they have totally merged private corporations with our public resources. And not only do we pay for those cops, but as I told you earlier, subsidize to the tune of $150 million of our taxpayer money. What do you call it when private corporations merge with the state? There's a word for it, but it's very wrong to utter that in polite media in America, okay? But it has become nearly complete, this merger. So now you think, as the NYPD is in such close cooperation with the Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, etc., that they're going to treat the protesters of Goldman Sachs as fairly and as even-handedly as the people at Goldman Sachs? And how about investigating those same guys? They're the ones that have all these charges of fraud and corruption against them. Those cops who are in the same room with them are going to turn around and investigate them adequately and fairly and efficiently? Yeah, really? Which planet? And shockingly enough, it turns out, other than a 128-year-old guy at Goldman Sachs, there has been no prosecution of any of the top bankers at any of those firms. None of the executives have been brought to trial or even brought on any sort of charges of fraud and corruption, when there are endless emails saying over and over again, we knew how toxic these mortgages were and we unloaded this crap on our clients. But their buddies at the NYPD work in this literally in the same building. No, we must spy on the citizens instead. By the way, don't worry, the NYPD tells us, because the privacy guidelines will mandate that all of this is kosher. Okay, so who wrote the privacy guidelines in this regard to make sure that our privacy is protected? Although I don't know how it's protected, since they're actually looking at all of this and actually do facial recognition software as well in this project, so they can know exactly who you are. Well, don't worry. The person who wrote it was Jessica Tisch. She was the director of counterterrorism policy and planning for the NYPD, we are assured, at the time in 2006 when these guidelines were written. Here's one of the problems. Jessica was a student, apparently, getting her law degree and MBA at Harvard at the time. So how she wrote those policy guidelines, maybe as a summer intern, I don't know. They didn't clarify. Well, if you notice her last name, Tisch, you might think, hey, that sounds a little familiar. Well, you would be right. Jessica Tisch is the granddaughter of Lawrence Tisch, who is now a deceased billionaire who built Lowe's Corporation. Her father, James Tisch, is the CEO of Lowe's Corporation. Now, look, they happen to own a corporation. That by itself doesn't mean anything, and they happen to be billionaires. But as it turns out, the Lowe's Corporation owns several companies that are also affected by the same exact agreement, and hence creating an enormous conflict of interest. Furthermore, that Lawrence Tisch, James Tisch, her father, is also on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And he was given that appointment by those same top banks that his 25-year-old daughter is writing guidelines for, to make sure that they're not unduly impinging on our privacy. How did she get the job other than all of these connections? Well, it turns out that her friend was the mayor's daughter. Also, her mother is a family friend of the mayor as well. It must be lovely in the top 1% as they all eat crumpets together. And at the end of the Truth Out article, they note that Wall Street's criminals have not been indicted or sent to jail because they have effectively become the police. If you're not scared by those developments, you're not paying attention and you don't have a good grasp of history. Usually when private corporations merge with the police, we wind up having very, very bad results.